My fiancé Jake and I have been together for 4 years. We met at a coffee shop, cliché, I know, when he accidentally grabbed my latte. We laughed about it, he bought me a new one, and we ended up talking for 3 hours. He was funny, kind, ambitious, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. We moved in together after a year, got engaged last Christmas, and everything seemed perfect. The wedding planning was stressful but normal stressful, you know? Venue drama, family opinions, the usual stuff. Jake seemed a little more anxious than usual the past few months, but I chalked it up to wedding nerves. He'd been having trouble sleeping and would sometimes just stare off into space. When I'd ask what was wrong, he'd always say, just work stuff or wedding jitters. I believed him. 3 weeks ago, Jake got a call while we were having dinner. He looked at his phone, went completely white, and said he had to take it. He went into the bedroom, and I could hear him talking in hushed, urgent tones. When he came back, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. I asked what was wrong, and he said it was a telemarketer, but that was obviously a lie. The next day, a package arrived for Jake. I wasn't trying to snoop, but I was home when the delivery guy came, and I signed for it. It was from some lab I'd never heard of. Jake came home from work, saw the package, and again went pale. He grabbed it and disappeared into his office for like 2 hours. When he came out, he was acting really weird, kept hugging me and telling me he loved me, almost desperately. Over the next few weeks, Jake became increasingly distant and anxious. He'd disappear for hours at a time, claiming he was handling last-minute wedding stuff or meeting with his groomsmen. But when I'd check with his best man Dave, he'd seem confused about what I was talking about. The night before our wedding, we had the rehearsal dinner. Jake was quiet through most of it, barely ate, and kept checking his phone. During the toasts, he got up to speak and just broke down crying. He said something about how sorry he was and how he never meant for any of this to happen. Everyone thought it was sweet, emotional groom, you know? But something felt off. After the dinner, we went back to our apartment. We were supposed to sleep separately, but decided to break tradition. Jake was acting so strange. He kept looking at me like he was memorizing my face. We went to bed around midnight. I woke up at 6 a.m. to my alarm, and he was gone. Not just gone. His clothes were missing, his toiletries, his laptop. Like he'd packed and left in the middle of the night. I called him probably 50 times. Straight to voicemail. I called his work. They said he'd requested emergency leave 3 weeks ago, but hadn't told me. I called his mom, his friends, his groomsmen. Nobody knew where he was. His best man Dave said Jake had texted him at 3 a.m. saying there wouldn't be a wedding and to tell everyone he was sorry. So there I was at 10 a.m., supposed to be getting my hair done, instead calling 200 guests to tell them the wedding was off. It was the most humiliating day of my life. My mom wanted to call the police, but what was I going to say? My fiancé got cold feet and ran? That's not a crime. Here's where it gets really weird. Yesterday, while I was dealing with the aftermath and crying into a pint of ice cream, I noticed Jake's office door was open. He'd always been particular about keeping it closed, and there were papers scattered on his desk. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I was desperate for answers. There was a DNA test report. Not the ancestry kind, a paternity test. Jake's name was on it, and some woman named Rebecca Martinez and a kid named Connor Martinez, age 8. The results showed Jake was the father with 99.7% certainty. I've never heard of Rebecca Martinez. I've been racking my brain, and I swear Jake has never mentioned this name. I looked her up on social media and found her. She lives about 2 hours away and has an 8-year-old son who, holy shit, looks exactly like Jake. Same eyes, same nose, same smile. It's uncanny. I'm trying to piece this together. Jake and I met 4 years ago. This kid is 8. So Jake had a kid he never told me about from before we met, and someone contacted him right before our wedding. I feel like my entire relationship was a lie. How do you hide a child for 4 years? How do you get a DNA test and then just disappear? I keep thinking about all the times he was working late or had mysterious errands. Was he visiting his son? Was he sending money? How did I not know? I'm devastated, but I'm also furious. Even if he panicked about the kid situation, how could he just leave me standing at the altar, literally? How could he put me through that humiliation instead of just talking to me? I thought we could get through anything together. I don't know what to do now. Part of me wants to track him down and demand answers. Part of me wants to pack up his stuff and leave it on the curb. Part of me is wondering if there's more to this story, and maybe I should try to understand before I write him off completely. Has anyone been through anything like this? How do you even begin to process something like this? I feel like I don't know the man I was about to marry at all. Update 1 to 8 hours later. Holy shit, you guys. I did not expect this to blow up like it did. Thank you for all the support and advice, even the tough love comments. I've been reading everything, and you've given me a lot to think about. A few people asked for more details, so here's what I remember now that the shock is wearing off. Jake was married briefly in his early 20s to his college girlfriend. It lasted about 18 months and ended when she moved across the country for graduate school. He said they realized they wanted different things, and it was amicable. He never mentioned any kids from that marriage. After his divorce, he said he went through a bit of a wild phase for about a year before settling down and focusing on his career. He was pretty vague about this time period, which I now realize might have been intentional. He's always been really good with kids, but in a way that seemed natural, not like someone with parenting experience. My nephew adores him, and Jake lights up around kids in a way that makes sense now but seemed just sweet before. There were definitely times over the years where he'd get calls that would make him tense up. He'd always take them in another room and would be short and businesslike. When I asked, he'd say it was work stuff or family drama. About 2 years ago, we had a pregnancy scare. When the test came back negative, I was honestly relieved because I wasn't ready. But Jake seemed genuinely disappointed, which surprised me at the time. Jake has always been protective of his privacy, especially around his phone and computer. Not suspicious exactly, but he'd never just hand me his phone to look something up or leave his email open where I could see it. Looking back, there were signs. I just trusted him completely and explained them away. Based on your advice, I've done a few things. 1. I tried calling Jake's mom again. This time I pressed harder. She broke down crying and admitted she'd suspected something was going on. She said Jake had been asking weird questions about hypothetical situations involving kids and responsibilities. She'd told him whatever was going on, he needed to handle it honestly, but she didn't know the specifics. 2. I found Rebecca's phone number through some internet detective work. I haven't called yet, but I'm thinking about it. I want to hear her side of the story. 3. I called Jake's work again and spoke to his boss. Turns out Jake had requested time off 3 weeks ago, saying he had a family emergency that might require him to relocate. His boss thought it was about a sick relative. So it sounds like Jake has been planning his exit for weeks, which honestly hurts worse than him just panicking and running. He was going to abandon me either way. He just couldn't handle doing it to my face. The thing that's killing me is that I would have tried to understand. If some woman had contacted me saying my fiancé had a son he didn't know about, yeah, it would have been a lot to process. But we could have figured it out together. The lying and abandoning me at the altar, though, that's unforgivable. I think I'm going to call Rebecca tomorrow. I need to understand the full story before I decide what to do next. Update 2 to 2 days later, okay. I talked to Rebecca, and the conversation cleared up a lot, but also made some things more complicated. First off, she was incredibly apologetic about the timing and the whole situation. She seemed genuinely upset that her reaching out had caused all of this chaos. Here's the real timeline. Rebecca and Jake had a brief relationship about 9 years ago, right after his divorce. She described it as a rebound situation for both of them. They'd met at a bar, hooked up a few times over the course of a month, but it was never serious. When it fizzled out, they lost touch completely. Rebecca found out she was pregnant about 6 weeks later. She tried to reach Jake, but he'd given her a phone number that was disconnected. Apparently, he'd gotten a new number after his divorce for a fresh start. She only knew his first name and where he worked at the time, but when she called his old company, they said he'd quit and wouldn't give her any forwarding information. Being young and scared, Rebecca decided to raise Connor on her own. She said she thought about trying harder to find Jake over the years, but life got busy and she convinced herself that if he'd wanted to stay in touch, he would have given her better contact information. Fast forward to this year. Connor is 8 now and starting to ask more serious questions about his father. Rebecca's been in therapy working through some of her own issues, and her therapist encouraged her to try reaching out to Jake again, both for Connor's sake and for closure. It took Rebecca months to track Jake down. She hired a private investigator who found him through employment records and social media connections. She said she had no idea he was engaged when she first called him. When she told Jake about Connor, he was shocked but didn't deny it was possible. He asked for a paternity test immediately, which Rebecca understood. The test confirmed what they both suspected. Here's what I didn't know. Jake didn't just disappear on me. He's been meeting with Rebecca and Connor for the past 3 weeks, trying to figure out how to be a father to a kid who's basically a stranger. Rebecca said Jake was overwhelmed, but trying his best. He'd been asking a lot of questions about Connor's life, his interests, his needs. But Rebecca also told me something that made my blood boil. Jake had told her he was engaged, but said he was going to handle it. He asked Rebecca not to contact me and said he'd figure out how to manage the situation. Those were his exact words, manage the situation. Like I was a problem to be solved rather than his partner, who deserved honesty. Rebecca said she'd been uncomfortable with the secrecy, but didn't want to overstep. She figured it was Jake's responsibility to tell his fiancé about Connor, not hers. The night before our wedding, Jake called Rebecca in tears. He said he couldn't go through with marrying me while hiding such a huge secret, but he also couldn't face telling me the truth. Rebecca said she tried to convince him to just postpone the wedding and take time to figure things out, but he said it was too late for that. So Jake packed up and drove to Rebecca's town that night. He's been staying in a motel there for the past few days, spending time with Connor and trying to figure out what to do next. I asked Rebecca about Connor and how he's handling all of this. She said he's actually thrilled to meet his dad and has been asking when he can see Jake again. The whole thing is heartbreaking. This little boy who's been wondering about his father his whole life, and now he finally gets to meet him. Rebecca also mentioned that Jake talks about me constantly. He's apparently been beating himself up about how he handled everything and keeps saying he's ruined the best thing in his life. But he's also convinced that I'll never forgive him. Rebecca gave me Jake's new phone number and the name of the motel where he's staying. She said she thinks he wants to talk to me, but is too ashamed to reach out first. I don't know how to feel about any of this. I understand why Jake panicked, and I can even understand why he didn't tell me immediately when Rebecca first called. But 3 weeks of lying to my face while planning our wedding? 3 weeks of letting me make final arrangements and get excited about our future while he was secretly preparing to abandon me? That feels unforgivable. On the other hand, Connor is an innocent kid who deserves to have his father in his life. And Jake is apparently trying to step up to that responsibility, which says something about his character. I'm still torn between wanting to hear Jake out and wanting to just cut my losses and move on. Part of me thinks I should drive up there and demand an explanation. Part of me thinks he made his choice when he left me at the altar. Update 3 to 5 days later. I drove up to see Jake yesterday. I needed to look him in the eye and get answers, even if it was just for closure. The motel Rebecca mentioned was easy to find. One of those extended stay places that's clean but depressing. I sat in the parking lot for probably 30 minutes, working up the courage to knock on his door. Jake answered on the first knock, like he'd been watching from the window. When he saw me, he just stood there for a moment looking shocked, then started crying. Not just tearing up, full-on sobbing. It was hard to watch, even as angry as I was. I pushed past him into the room and immediately laid into him. I told him exactly how humiliated I felt, how worried I'd been, how completely he destroyed my trust in him. I told him that I could have handled the Connor situation, but I couldn't handle being lied to and abandoned. Jake listened without defending himself. When I was done yelling, he sat down heavily on the bed and said he knew he'd been a coward. He said that when Rebecca first called, his immediate thought was that he was going to lose me. He'd convinced himself that if he could just get through the wedding first, he'd have more time to figure out how to tell me about Connor without it ending our relationship. But as the weeks went by, the lie got bigger and the weight of it became unbearable. He said he kept starting to tell me and then chickening out. He was terrified that I'd think he was a deadbeat dad, or that I wouldn't want to take on a stepmother role, or that I'd leave him anyway, but it would be even messier after we were married. I asked him why he didn't just postpone the wedding when he realized he couldn't go through with it. He said by that point, he felt like it was too late. The venue was paid for, everyone had made travel arrangements, and he was paralyzed by the thought of disappointing everyone. So instead, he disappointed everyone in the worst possible way. We talked for about 2 hours. Jake told me about Connor, how scary and amazing it is to suddenly have an 8-year-old son, how guilty he feels for missing Connor's whole life so far, how Connor is smart and funny and loves dinosaurs and soccer. I could see how much Jake already cared about this kid he barely knew. Jake also admitted that he'd been seeing a therapist since he left, trying to understand why he'd handled everything so badly. He said the therapist told him he has issues with conflict avoidance and a pattern of running away from difficult situations instead of facing them. Here's the thing, despite everything, I could still see the Jake I fell in love with. The one who used to make me laugh until my sides hurt, who brought me soup when I was sick, who cried with me when my grandmother died. He was still there under all the fear and bad decisions. But I also realized something important. I didn't know if I could ever trust him again. Not just about honesty, but about reliability. When things got really hard, Jake ran. How could I build a life with someone knowing that when we faced our next big challenge, he might just disappear again? Before I left, Jake asked if there was any chance we could work through this. I told him I honestly didn't know. I said that even if I could get past the lying and the abandonment, our life would be completely different now. Connor would be part of it, which meant Rebecca would always be part of it too in some way. That's not necessarily bad, but it's not what I'd signed up for. I also told him I needed time and space to think. No contact for at least a month while I figured out what I wanted. As I was getting ready to leave, I heard voices outside. Through the window, I could see Rebecca walking toward the room with a little boy, Connor. Jake had mentioned they were coming by so Connor could see his new art supplies. Connor looked up at me curiously when I came out of the room. He had Jake's eyes and smile, but also this sweet, innocent energy that just made my heart ache. He asked Jake who I was, and Jake looked at me helplessly before saying I was a friend. Connor smiled and waved before running inside to show Jake a drawing he'd made. I could hear him chattering excitedly about his day at school, and Jake's voice responding with genuine interest and affection. The whole drive home, I kept thinking about that little boy. He's just happy to finally have his dad around. He doesn't understand that his existence turned two adults' lives upside down. He's just a kid who wants to share his drawings and hear bedtime stories from his father. I still don't know what I'm going to do. The rational part of my brain says too much damage has been done, and I should move on. But there's another part that wonders if Jake and I could rebuild something stronger if we both committed to complete honesty and working through problems together instead of running from them. What I do know is that I'm not the same person I was 3 weeks ago. This whole experience has forced me to think about what I really need in a partner and what I'm willing to accept. Do I want someone who runs when things get complicated? Can I be a stepmother figure to Connor? Can I share Jake with Rebecca and co-parenting responsibilities? These aren't questions I ever expected to ask myself, but here we are. Update 4 to 3 weeks later. I've spent the past 3 weeks in therapy, thinking and trying to figure out what I really want. I think I finally have some clarity. First, thank you to everyone who's been following the saga and offering advice. Even the brutal honesty has been helpful in forcing me to think about things from different angles. I stuck to my no-contact rule with Jake, which was harder than I expected. He respected it though, no calls, no texts, no showing up at my door. That actually meant something to me. My therapist helped me work through not just the Jake situation, but some deeper patterns in my relationships. Turns out I have a tendency to make excuses for people I love and to ignore red flags when I want something to work out. She also helped me understand that trust isn't just about honesty in the moment. It's about trusting someone to face life's challenges with you instead of running away. I also did something that felt necessary. I reached out to Jake's ex-wife, Sarah. I found her on LinkedIn and sent a careful message asking if she'd be willing to talk. She called me that evening. That conversation was eye-opening. Sarah told me that Jake had a pattern of shutting down and withdrawing whenever they faced serious problems during their marriage. She said he'd sometimes disappear for days, not literally leaving, but emotionally checking out and refusing to discuss whatever was bothering him. When she finally asked for a divorce, he didn't fight for their relationship, just agreed and moved out without much discussion. Sarah said she wasn't surprised when I told her what happened. She said Jake is a good person who means well, but he never learned how to handle conflict or stress in healthy ways. She warned me that even if he was in therapy now, changing those deeply ingrained patterns would take years of consistent work. That conversation helped me realize that Jake's disappearing act wasn't just about the Connor situation. It was part of a bigger pattern of how he deals with difficult situations. I also had coffee with Rebecca, which might sound weird, but felt important. She wanted to make sure there were no hard feelings between us, and I wanted to hear how Jake was doing with Connor. Rebecca told me that Jake has been great with Connor, patient, attentive, really trying to make up for lost time. Connor is apparently crazy about his dad and talks about him constantly. But Rebecca also noticed that when logistical discussions get stressful, like scheduling or Connor asking difficult questions about why Jake wasn't around before, she can see Jake start to withdraw emotionally. She's worried that if co-parenting gets too complicated, he might pull back from Connor too. That confirmed what I'd already started to realize. Yesterday, I called Jake and told him I'd made my decision. I can't do this. I can't be with someone who runs when life gets hard, because life will always have hard moments. What happens the next time we face something difficult? If we have financial problems or health scares or family crises? Will he disappear again and leave me to handle it alone? I told Jake that I could see he was trying to be a good father to Connor, and that made me genuinely happy. Connor deserves to have his dad in his life. But I also told him that I couldn't be with someone I couldn't count on when things got tough. Jake cried, but he didn't argue with me. I think part of him knew this was coming. He apologized again and said he understood my decision. He also said he hoped that someday, with enough therapy and work on himself, he could become the kind of person who deserves someone like me, but he knew he wasn't there yet. It was sad, but also felt like the right choice. We both finally acknowledged what had probably been true for a while. I'm keeping our apartment since Jake had already broken his lease and found a place near Rebecca and Connor. He's handling all the wedding-related financial stuff, which seems fair given the circumstances. I'm planning a solo trip to Ireland, something I've always wanted to do, but kept putting off. I'm continuing with therapy, and eventually, I'll be open to dating again, but with much clearer boundaries about what I need in a partner. We're returning all the wedding gifts and donating the money to a local organization that helps single parents. It seemed appropriate. I know some people will think I should have tried harder to make it work. That love should be enough to overcome anything. But I've learned that love without trust and reliability isn't sustainable, at least not for me. I need a partner who faces problems with me, not one who disappears when things get complicated. Jake isn't a bad person. He's just not the right person for me. And that's okay. The most important thing is that Connor has his father now. Based on what Rebecca tells me, Jake is really stepping up and trying to build a relationship with his son. I hope he sticks with it and doesn't let his pattern of avoidance interfere with being the dad Connor needs. As for me, I'm okay. Actually, I'm more than okay. I feel like I've learned something crucial about myself and what I need in a relationship. It's not the ending I planned, but it's the right one. Thanks for following along on this journey, Reddit. Here's to new beginnings and knowing your worth. Final update, 2 months later. Hey everyone. I know I said my last update was final, but I wanted to give you one more update since so many people have been asking how things turned out. I'm doing really well. The solo trip to Ireland was exactly what I needed. 2 weeks of beautiful scenery, good food, and time to just be with myself. I feel like I've really found my footing again. I'm still in therapy, and it's been incredibly helpful. I've learned a lot about my own patterns and what I want in future relationships. I'm not dating yet, but I'm open to it when the right person comes along. A few people have asked if Jake ever reached out after our final conversation. He sent one text about a week later just saying, "I hope you find someone who deserves you and treats you the way you should be treated." I didn't respond, but it felt like a mature way to end things. I did hear through mutual friends that Jake is still living near Rebecca and Connor and seems to be doing well as a father. Apparently Connor is thriving having his dad around, which makes me genuinely happy. Whatever else happened between Jake and me, that little boy deserves to have both his parents in his life. I also heard that Jake is still in therapy and seems to be taking it seriously. I hope that's true, not for my sake, but for Connor's. That kid needs a dad who will stick around when things get tough. As for me, I'm focusing on my career, my friendships, and figuring out what I want my life to look like. I'm thinking about getting a dog, maybe taking some art classes, possibly moving to a different neighborhood for a fresh start. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can also be the thing that saves you from making a bigger mistake. If Jake hadn't run, I might have married someone who would have disappeared on me later when we faced even bigger challenges, like sick kids, job loss, or aging parents. Better to find out now than after years of marriage and possibly children of our own. I'm also grateful that I learned to trust my instincts better. There were signs that something was off, and I explained them away because I wanted our relationship to work. I won't make that mistake again. Oh, and for those who asked, I did get the engagement ring redesigned. It's now a beautiful pendant necklace that's completely different from the original ring. It feels good to have turned something that represented broken promises into something that's just mine. My mom has finally stopped asking when Jake and I are going to work things out, which is a relief. She's actually been really supportive and keeps telling me how proud she is of how I handled everything. That means a lot. I also want to address something a few people mentioned in comments. Some of you thought I was too harsh on Jake, that he was just scared and made a mistake. I get that perspective, and I don't hate Jake or think he's evil. But I learned something important. You can understand why someone hurt you without accepting that behavior in your life. Jake's fear was understandable, but the way he handled it was unacceptable to me. Those can both be true at the same time. I think the difference between a mistake and a pattern is important too. If Jake had panicked and told me the truth the day before the wedding, asking to postpone while we figured things out, that would have been a mistake I could have worked with. But 3 weeks of lies while planning our future, followed by abandoning me without explanation, that's a pattern of avoidance that goes deeper than just being scared. I hope Jake really is working on himself and becomes a better partner for someone else someday. More importantly, I hope he becomes the reliable father Connor needs. But I couldn't be the person to wait around and see if he'd change, not after what he put me through. For anyone going through something similar, trust your gut. If someone shows you who they are in a crisis, believe them. And know that you deserve someone who faces life's challenges with you, not someone who runs when things get hard. I never thought I'd say this after everything that happened, but I'm actually grateful for this experience. It taught me what I will and won't accept in a relationship, and it forced me to become more independent and self-aware. The woman I am now is stronger than the woman who is about to marry Jake, and that's worth something. Thanks again to everyone who followed the story and offered support. This community can be brutal sometimes, but it can also be incredibly kind and wise. You helped me see things clearly when I was too close to the situation to think straight. I'm closing this chapter of my life and looking forward to whatever comes next. It's going to be good, I can feel it. Edit. Since people keep asking, no, I haven't heard anything else about Jake or Connor, and I don't expect to. Our lives have gone in different directions, and that's how it should be. I genuinely wish them all the best, but from a distance. And yes, I'm keeping the apartment. Jake paid his portion of the lease through the end as agreed, and I've made it completely my own space now. It feels like home again instead of a reminder of what I lost. One last thing, to anyone who thinks I should have fought harder for the relationship, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is recognize when something isn't working and let it go. I fought for 4 years to build something with Jake. When it mattered most, he didn't fight alongside me, he ran. That told me everything I needed to know about what our future would have looked like. I'm at peace with my decision, and that's what matters most.